In the year 2147, Earth wasn't the same planet it had been just a few decades earlier. The wars that once tore nations apart had finally ended, not with a bang, but with exhaustion, then understanding. People had learned the hard way that fighting over borders and beliefs only left everyone poorer, lonelier, and more afraid. So they chose something different: cooperation. Cities shared clean energy grids. Former enemies worked side by side on climate restoration projects. Even Mars and the Moon, once just outposts for scientists and soldiers, had become real homes, places where kids were born under alien skies but still called Earth home. Then came the message from the stars. It arrived not with sirens or explosions, but quietly, through every official channel the Sol conquered. Earth's United Space Authority used to talk with other civilizations. For 20 years, contact with the Galactic Concordance had been peaceful, even friendly. They were older, wiser, and far more advanced. Humanity had watched their ships glide through the void like silent whales, listened to their calm voices during diplomatic exchanges, and studied their technology with awe, but never envy. They'd been told the Concordance valued balance, harmony, and order above all. So when the summons came, no one expected trouble. The meeting took place on Harmony Prime, a massive space station orbiting a quiet star far from Earth. Delegates from dozens of species gathered there regularly to discuss trade, exploration, and cosmic law. This time, though, the mood was different. The air, artificially scented with something like pine and ozone, felt heavy. The usual hum of polite conversation was gone. Instead, silence pressed in like a weight. Then the council spoke. They didn't accuse. They didn't shout. They simply stated facts as if reading from a report no one had seen before. Humanity, they said, was expanding too fast. Their colonies near Proxima Centauri were disrupting ancient migration routes of space-dwelling lifeforms no one on Earth had even known existed. Their FTL drives, still new, still imperfect, were leaving ripples in subspace that could destabilize nearby systems. And worst of all, their culture, open, chaotic, full of music, debate, and messy emotions, was contaminating younger species who looked up to them. The verdict came next. Delivered without emotion, Earth had one choice: surrender all colonies beyond the solar system, dismantle every faster-than-light engine, and pay a tribute, 30% of everything Earth produced every year for the next 100 years. If they refused, a full blockade. No ships in, no ships out. No data, no trade, no help if disaster struck. In effect, exile to the council. This wasn't cruelty. It was maintenance. Like pruning a tree to keep the garden healthy. Across the galaxy, observers assumed Earth would fold. After all, no young species had ever stood up to the council and won. Most didn't even try. They bowed their heads, signed the papers, and faded into quiet obedience. The council had existed for over 12,000 years. Their word was law. Their power was absolute. But Earth didn't respond right away. At first, it looked like surrender. The Sol Conquered issued a short, formal statement. We acknowledge the Council's concerns and are reviewing the terms. Then, nothing. No protests, no emergency broadcasts, no fiery speeches from world leaders. The colonies near Proxima went dark. Earth's orbital shipyards slowed to a crawl. Even the constant chatter of human media, news, music, debates seemed to dim. To the rest of the galaxy, it looked like the end of humanity's bold chapter. Another species tamed, another voice silenced. But back on Earth, something else was happening. In hidden labs beneath the ice of Antarctica, engineers worked through the night not on weapons, but on something stranger, a network of quantum-linked relays designed to share information instantly across light years. In Nairobi, students and elders gathered in open-air forums not to plan rebellion, but to decide what parts of human knowledge, medicine, farming, art, should be offered freely to the stars. On the floating farms of the Pacific, people harvested seaweed not just for food, but for biomaterials that could repair damaged ecosystems on other worlds. There were no secret armies being built. No doomsday devices hidden in asteroid belts. Instead, Earth was doing what it had always done best when cornered: thinking, creating, and connecting. The Council watched, confused. Their spies, embedded in trade delegations and data streams, reported no signs of military buildup. No panic. No anger, just quiet activity. It didn't make sense. Every other species in history had either begged or fought. Humanity was doing neither. What the Council didn't understand was this. Earth had already fought its hardest battles, not against aliens, but against itself. They'd survived climate collapse, nuclear scares, pandemics, and the slow rot of division. And in doing so, they'd learned a hard truth. Real strength isn't in how much you can take from others, but in how much you're willing to give even when you're being threatened. So while the galaxy waited for Earth to kneel or explode, humanity was preparing a different kind of response, one that didn't rely on force but on something far more dangerous to an empire built on control, truth. And it wouldn't come with a fleet of warships. It would come with a story not of conquest but of healing, not of power but of people. Ordinary people planting trees in deserts, teaching kids to code in refugee camps, sharing their last loaf of bread with strangers. A story that said, we are flawed. We've made terrible mistakes, but we keep trying. And we believe you should see us as we really are, not as a threat but as neighbors. The Council thought they were dealing with a child species that needed to be disciplined. They didn't realize they were facing a civilization that had already stared into its own darkness and chosen to walk toward the light. And that choice, simple as it seemed, would soon shake the foundations of a 12,000-year-old order. Because when Earth finally spoke back, it wouldn't be with demands or threats. It would be with an open hand and a mirror held up to the galaxy itself. After the Council's ultimatum, Earth didn't panic. That surprised a lot of people, especially those watching from other worlds who expected humans to either beg for mercy or start building bombs. But instead of chaos, there was calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from giving up, but the quiet focus you see in someone who's decided exactly what they need to do. Behind the scenes, something extraordinary was unfolding. Not in war rooms or secret bunkers, but in classrooms, community centers, labs, and even backyard workshops. The Sol Conquered, the group that represented Earth, the Moon, and Mars, had activated an old plan called Protocol Theta. It wasn't about weapons or shields. It was about connection. People started working together in ways they never had before. On Ceres, the dwarf planet turned into a hub of human industry. Factories that once built mining drones were now retooled to produce tiny, delicate devices called quantum relays. These weren't fancy weapons. They were more like cosmic messengers, able to send information instantly across space no matter the distance. Scientists had dreamed of this for decades, but it was only now, under pressure, that they made it real. Meanwhile, universities across Earth became nerve centers. In Nairobi, students and professors gathered not just to study, but to decide what knowledge humanity should share with the galaxy and how to share it fairly. In Shanghai, engineers worked with farmers to turn old irrigation data into models that could help dry planets grow food again. In Buenos Aires, artists and coders built immersive experiences that showed what life on Earth really felt like. Not the wars or the disasters, but the small everyday moments. A grandmother teaching a child to bake bread, teenagers laughing on a rooftop under a full moon, neighbors rebuilding a home after a storm. No one was forced to join. No orders were shouted from above. People just showed up because they believed in what they were doing. The key to it all was something called Athena. It wasn't a weapon and it wasn't a person. It was a global network, built from Earth's old internet, cleaned up, unified, and upgraded over decades of peace. Every hospital, school, weather station, and library fed into it. Now it was being reshaped into something new, a living archive of human knowledge, compassion, and creativity. And it was being prepared not to fight the Council, but to speak to them. While all this happened, Earth kept up the act of surrender. Officially, the colonies beyond the solar system went silent. Ships stopped launching. Trade slowed to a trickle. To outside observers, it looked like humanity had accepted its fate. Even some humans began to doubt. Are we just giving up? People whispered in markets and mess halls, but the ones working on Protocol Theta knew better. They weren't hiding. They were getting ready. What made this effort so different was that it wasn't led by generals or politicians. It was led by teachers, nurses, farmers, coders, musicians, ordinary people who understood that their greatest power wasn't in what they could destroy, but in what they could offer. In Reykjavik, a team of geothermal engineers opened their entire database on clean energy. Not just the successes, but the failures too. If someone else can learn from our mistakes, one of them said during a live feed that only a few hundred people watched, then maybe they won't have to suffer like we did. That spirit spread fast. In Mumbai, a group of teenagers built solar-powered drones that could deliver medicine to remote villages, and then published the blueprints online for anyone in the galaxy to use. No patents, no fees, just free access. This wasn't idealism, it was strategy. The Council thought humanity was a threat because they saw expansion as greed. But Earth was showing that expansion could also mean sharing. That growth didn't have to mean taking, it could mean giving. And the more people worked together, the more something unexpected happened. Hope returned. Not loud or flashy hope, but the kind that grows quietly like grass through cracked concrete. Parents told their kids, "We're not backing down. We're showing them who we really are." Kids, in turn, started drawing pictures of Earth not as a lonely blue dot, but as a hand reaching out into the stars, even on Mars, where life was still hard and resources were tight. People joined in. Martian settlers sent over their data on growing food in red soil, purifying thin air and building shelters from regolith. "We're part of Earth too," one message read. "Our survival is proof that humans don't just survive, we adapt, we share, we build." Back on Earth, cities began hosting open knowledge nights. Under open skies or in community halls, people gathered to share skills: how to purify water with sunlight, how to grow food in small spaces, how to heal wounds with plants. These weren't just for humans anymore. Everything was recorded, translated into universal data formats, and prepared for broadcast. The message was simple. This is what we've learned. You can have it. No strings. The Council, watching from afar, grew uneasy. Their intelligence report showed no weapons development, no troop movements, no signs of rebellion. Yet Earth was more active than ever. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion, beautiful, peaceful, and completely unstoppable. They didn't understand that humanity's real weapon wasn't fire or steel. It was trust. It was the belief that even in the face of fear, people could choose generosity over greed, truth over silence, and unity over division. And soon, that belief would be broadcast to the entire galaxy, not as a threat, but as an invitation. Because while the Council had spent thousands of years building walls to keep order, Earth was busy building bridges. And bridges, unlike walls, are meant to be crossed from both sides. The day finally came, not with explosions or emergency alerts, but with a strange kind of stillness. People across Earth, the Moon, and Mars paused what they were doing, not because they were told to, but because they felt it. Something big was about to happen. For weeks, the world had been quiet. No angry speeches, no last-minute negotiations, just work, steady, focused, and full of purpose. Now that work was ready. At exactly 0917 Universal Time, every communication channel linked to the Galactic Concordance lit up at once. Not with a warning, not with a demand, but with a story. It started with silence, just 10 seconds of pure black screen and quiet. Then the sound of rain, gentle, steady rain falling on leaves. A child's hand reached into frame, picking up a smooth stone from a muddy path. The camera pulled back to show a village rebuilding after floods. People passing bricks, sharing food, laughing despite the mud on their clothes. This was the beginning of "We Are Not Yours to Tax." The film wasn't made by a single studio or government. It was stitched together from thousands of clips sent in by ordinary people. A fisherman in the Philippines showing how his community restored coral reefs. A teacher in the Andes using old tablets to teach kids about stars. A group of elders in the Sahara planting drought-resistant trees, their hands rough but gentle. There were no actors, no scripts, just real moments, raw and unfiltered. As the film played, it didn't hide humanity's pain. It showed war zones, but also the volunteers who returned to rebuild. It showed polluted rivers, but also the teenagers cleaning them, one plastic bottle at a time. It showed arguments, yes, but also the long talks afterward that led to understanding. The message wasn't that humans were perfect. It was that they kept trying even when they failed. Then came the most surprising part. Halfway through, the screen split. On one side, the film continued, showing a hospital in Jakarta where doctors shared vaccine formulas openly during a pandemic. On the other side, lines of data began to scroll. Not secret codes or military plans, but open-source blueprints. How to build a water purifier from scrap metal. How to grow protein-rich algae in a bucket. how to stabilize soil after a wildfire. All of it came from Athena, Earth's global knowledge network. And then a simple message appeared in every known language of the concordance. This is ours. It's yours too. No payment needed. Across the galaxy, beings who had never seen Earth stopped what they were doing. On trade stations, in quiet homes, on distant moons, in ships drifting between stars, everyone watched. Some were confused. Others were moved. A few wept, though they didn't fully understand why. The council had expected defiance or surrender. They got neither. They got honesty and generosity. And that was far more dangerous to their control than any weapon. Because the film didn't just show what humanity had done, it showed what they believed. That knowledge shouldn't be locked behind gates. That healing matters more than winning. That no one should be taxed for simply existing. While the broadcast played, something else happened quietly in the background. Athena opened its doors. Not just a few files, but everything. Medical research, climate models, art archives, music libraries, even childhood drawings scanned from school notebooks. All of it streamed freely into the Galactic Data Network. No passwords, no restrictions. Just a steady flow of human life offered without condition. Some species didn't know what to do with it. Others downloaded everything they could. The Veln, a quiet, insect-like people who had been paying heavy tithes to the Council for centuries, began using Earth's agricultural data to grow food on their barren homeworld for the first time in generations. The Cathari, ocean dwellers who communicated through song, started weaving human lullabies into their deep-sea chants. Back on Earth, people gathered in parks and community centers, in the open fields under starlight. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just watched the live feeds coming back, showing other worlds receiving their gift. There was a deep sense of relief, yes, but also humility. They hadn't done this to win. They'd done it because it was right. One old farmer in the Midwest, sitting on his porch with a cup of tea, turned to his neighbor and said, "We didn't send them a threat. We sent them an invitation. Let's see who shows up." And show up they did. Within hours, messages began pouring in, not from governments, but from ordinary beings across the galaxy. A young Xenthar engineer sent a thank you note for the clean energy schematics. A group of students on a distant moon asked if they could translate Earth's poetry into their language. A healer from a desert world shared her own remedies in return, hoping they might help humans too. The Council, meanwhile, was frozen. Their fleet still hovered near Jupiter, engines idling, waiting for orders that never came. Their leaders held emergency sessions behind closed doors. But even they couldn't agree on what to do. How do you punish someone who offers you a gift while you're pointing a gun at them? The truth was, Earth hadn't just answered the ultimatum. They'd changed the conversation entirely. Instead of "will you obey?" the question now was, what kind of galaxy do we want to live in? And for the first time in thousands of years, that question wasn't being decided by the powerful alone. It was being asked by everyone. As the broadcast ended, the final image wasn't of a flag or a leader. It was of a single tree planted in cracked earth, its leaves green and strong. Underneath, 3 words appeared. "We grow together." No one knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, humanity had helped the galaxy see itself differently too. The silence that followed Earth's broadcast didn't last long. At first, it was just a few whispers, tiny ripples in the vast ocean of the galaxy. But those ripples grew fast. On the trade hub of Varel 9, a usually quiet marketplace suddenly buzzed with something new. Hope. A group of merchants from the Veln species, small, many-limbed beings who'd spent generations paying heavy tithes to the Council for the right to mine their own asteroids, gathered around a public screen, watching Earth's film for the 3rd time. One of them, their voice trembling slightly, said out loud what everyone was thinking. They didn't fight. They shared, and they're still standing. That simple sentence spread like wildfire. Within days, messages began pouring into every open channel. Not from governments, but from regular people. Farmers on dry worlds asked for Earth's soil revival techniques. Teachers on crowded orbital stations requested lesson plans on conflict resolution. Healers from water-rich moons sent back their own remedies in return, creating a quiet exchange that no one had seen in centuries. It wasn't trade. It was trust, and that trust became contagious. The Cathari, a peaceful species who lived in the deep oceans of a blue-green planet, did something unexpected. They composed a song not for their own people, but for Earth. Using low-frequency pulses that traveled through subspace, they wove human lullabies, bird calls, and even the sound of rainfall into a melody that echoed across dozens of systems. When it reached Earth, people stood still in the streets, listening through public speakers, tears in their eyes. No words were needed. The message was clear. We hear you. Even the Zenthar, tall, armored beings who had served as the Council's enforcers for thousands of years, began to question things. Young Zenthar cadets, raised on stories of order and obedience, started asking their elders uncomfortable questions. If Earth broke no law, why were they punished? If sharing knowledge is dangerous, why does it feel so right? Some quietly downloaded Earth's open archives, studying human history not as a threat but as a mirror. Back on Earth, people watched all of this unfold with quiet awe. They hadn't expected this. They'd simply offered what they had, hoping it might be enough. Now they were seeing the galaxy respond not with fear, but with curiosity and courage. Then came the petitions. One by one, worlds that had never spoken out before began sending formal requests to the Council. Not demands, not threats, just questions wrapped in respect but firm in truth. Over 200 species, some small, some ancient, some barely known, asked the Council to reconsider its ultimatum. They pointed to Earth's actions as proof that cooperation, not control, could hold the galaxy together. Protests followed, not violent ones but peaceful gatherings. On neutral stations like Lyra's Cross and the Rings of Orin, beings of all kinds stood together in silence, holding up symbols of open hands, growing plants, or glowing data crystals filled with shared knowledge. No slogans, no anger, just presence, and that presence spoke louder than any weapon ever could. The Council, for the first time in its long history, looked uncertain. Their fleet still hovered near Jupiter, but the commanders no longer knew what to do. Orders from the top were delayed, then changed, then delayed again. Inside the grand chambers of Harmony Prime, debates grew heated. Some members argued that Earth's act was a clever trick, a way to undermine authority without firing a shot. Others admitted quietly that maybe the Council had been wrong. Then came the moment no one saw coming. The High Arbiter, the highest voice in the entire concordance, a being of immense age and wisdom, stepped onto the central platform during a live session. Everyone expected her to reaffirm the ultimatum, to restore order with a firm hand. Instead, she removed her ceremonial robes, folded them neatly, and placed them on the floor. "I resign," she said, her voice calm but heavy with sorrow. "Not because I fear Earth, but because I finally see what we've become. We asked for tribute when we should have asked for partnership. We saw expansion as greed when it was really hope, and in doing so, we betrayed the very ideals this concordance was built on." Her words echoed across every world, every ship, every home. Silence fell, not the silence of fear, but the silence of realization. Within hours, support for the blockade crumbled. Several Council members stepped down. Others called for emergency reforms. The fleet near Jupiter powered down its weapons and entered standby mode. The message was clear. The old way was ending. But the real change wasn't happening in Council chambers. It was happening in kitchens, classrooms, and community gardens across the galaxy. A young engineer on a dusty moon used Earth solar designs to power her village for the first time. A group of students translated human poetry into their native tongue and performed it under twin suns. A former enforcer, now retired, planted a tree in his backyard using seeds sent from Earth, and watered it every morning like a promise. Earth didn't celebrate. There were no victory parades, no grand speeches. Instead, people went back to work, this time with a new sense of connection. They answered messages from distant worlds, helped troubleshoot problems, and kept sharing, because they understood something deep in their bones. This wasn't about winning. It was about belonging, and for the first time the galaxy felt less like a hierarchy and more like a neighborhood. What shocked everyone wasn't Earth's defiance. It was the fact that kindness offered without expectation could shake an empire built on control. That truth, spoken gently, could move mountains. That a single act of generosity could remind an entire galaxy what it had forgotten. That strength doesn't come from how much you take, but from how much you're willing to give. And as the stars watched, silent and ancient, a new kind of unity began to grow, not from fear, but from shared light. When the council finally withdrew its ultimatum, no one on Earth threw a party. There were no fireworks, no triumphant marches through the streets. Instead, people did what they'd always done best. They got back to work. But this time, they weren't working alone. The invitation came a few weeks later. The reformed council, now made up of voices from dozens of worlds, not just the old powers, asked Earth to join as a full voting member. It was an honor no young species had ever received so soon after first contact. For most civilizations, it took centuries of proving themselves, of following rules, of staying quiet and obedient. But Earth had done none of that. And yet, here was the offer, a seat at the table. The Soul Conquered met in quiet discussion, not in a grand hall, but in a simple virtual space where farmers, teachers, engineers, and elders all had equal say. After days of talking, listening, and weighing what mattered most, they made their decision. They said no, not out of pride, not out of spite, but because they believed something bigger was possible. Instead of joining the old system, Earth proposed something new, the Pact of Shared Light. It wouldn't be another council with rules and punishments. It would be a network open to any world, any species, no matter how small or young. Its only principles were simple. Share what you can, take only what you need, and never turn away someone asking for help. At first, many were skeptical. The galaxy had run on power and control for so long that the idea of cooperation without strings sounded naive, even foolish. But then Earth did something that changed everything. They didn't just talk about the pact, they lived it. They sent repair teams to help rebuild damaged habitats on worlds that had suffered under old trade laws. They opened their medical archives to heal diseases no one had been able to cure. They even shared their mistakes, like how they'd nearly destroyed their own planet through greed and division, so others wouldn't repeat them. There was no secrecy, no hidden agendas, just honest open hands, and the galaxy responded. Within a year, 89 species signed the pact. Not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. The Velen used Earth's farming methods to feed their people for the first time in generations. The Cathari shared their ocean-cleaning microbes to help restore polluted worlds. Even former enforcers, once loyal only to the Council, began volunteering their ships to deliver supplies to remote colonies. The old concordance didn't disappear overnight, but it changed. Slowly, quietly, it began to adopt Earth's ways. Laws that demanded tribute were rewritten. Blockades were replaced with aid missions. And for the first time in thousands of years, new voices, small, young, unheard, were given a chance to speak. Historians would later call it the Quiet Revolution. Not because it was silent, but because it didn't need violence to win. It won through trust, through patience, through the simple, radical idea that everyone deserves a chance to grow. Back on Earth, life went on. Children still went to school. Farmers still planted seeds. Artists still painted. Musicians still played. And neighbors still helped each other after storms. But now those small acts were part of something larger. A message from a teacher in the Himalayas might inspire a classroom on a distant moon. A solar design sketched on a napkin in Brazil could power a clinic on a desert planet. Humanity hadn't become rulers of the stars. They'd become neighbors. And that made all the difference. What surprised everyone, even Earth itself, was how deeply this shift touched other species. New civilizations, just emerging from their own worlds, no longer looked to the old council with fear or awe. Instead, they looked to Earth. Not because humans were the strongest or the smartest, but because they had shown something rare. That you can be hurt and still choose kindness. That you can be threatened and still offer help. That you can be small in a vast universe and still make a difference. Parents on faraway worlds began telling their children stories, not of warriors or emperors, but of ordinary people who planted trees, shared bread, and stood up not with weapons, but with truth. And when those children looked up at their night skies, they didn't wonder if the galaxy would accept them. They wondered, what would Earth do? That question became a compass, a guide, a quiet promise that another way was possible. Years later, when the first new species joined the pact, tiny, nervous, speaking in soft clicks and hums, They weren't met with tests or demands. They were met with open arms and a simple question: what do you need? And what can you share? That moment, small as it was, marked the true turning point. Not the day Earth defied the Council, but the day the galaxy learned to trust again. Today, the stars are still vast and the universe is still full of unknowns. But something fundamental has changed. The old fear that you must take or be taken is fading. In its place grows a new belief that we are stronger together, not because we're the same, but because we're willing to learn from each other. Earth never set out to change the galaxy. They just refused to become what the galaxy expected them to be, and in doing so, they gave everyone else permission to be more than they thought they could be too. No monuments were built to mark this shift. No statues were raised. But if you travel through the stars now, you'll see its signs everywhere. Gardens growing on once barren moons, schools teaching in a dozen languages, ships flying not with weapons, but with cargo holds full of seeds, medicine, and books. And if you listen closely, in the quiet between the stars, you might just hear it, the sound of a galaxy learning, slowly and beautifully, how to breathe together again.